G'day guys, welcome back to True Footy. Today I am going to be reacting to the first night of the draft, which just finished up with Fremantle taking Adam Swade with the final selection. And it was a pretty interesting first night, to be honest. It went a little bit as expected to about pick 7, and then we had a lot of stories and talking points. So I'm just going to recap what I thought personally. Just a few points of housekeeping. Dylan and I will be live streaming tomorrow for night 2. So make sure you're there to follow along with us. Dylan was wrapped up with the Dan Does Footy live show tonight, but we'll be back to our usual programming tomorrow night. As for the Eagles fans who are awaiting my reaction to night 1 of the draft on True Eagle, I've got tomorrow off work, so I'll be filming that first thing in the morning to talk about the Eagles specifically. Now, let's just talk about the draft in general, pick by pick, and I'll give you my thoughts as to how it went down. So, as I said off the top, I think the first 7 picks went as expected, and when I say as expected, I mean in comparison to Cal Toomey's mock draft that he released. Without double checking, I think there's been no deviations from that. So, at pick 1, the Eagles took Willem Dersma. We've known about that for some time, I think. That was clearly the right choice, and as an Eagles fan, I'm very excited to see him and Harley Reid playing in the same team. Gold Coast then matched a bid for Zeke Hewland. I suppose that maybe I could call this a surprise. I'm still a little surprised and stunned that West Coast bid on Harry Dean with pick 3 over some other players, like a Dylan Patterson or a Dan Annable. They really rated Harry Dean the 3rd best player in this draft. That does surprise me, to be honest with you. And in the end, obviously, Carlton match. And I'm not really sure if there was any other motive for West Coast to do this other than the fact that they simply rated him as the 3rd best player in it. In the first 4 selections of this draft, West Coast dictated the order. That is the order we know the Eagles specifically rated them. So I found that really interesting. And, Carlton now have Jagger Smith, who is pick 3. They have Harry Dean, who is pick 3. And then next year, they'll likely have Cody Walker, who is probably going to be pick 1 or 2 as it currently stands. So getting access to top players in the last 3 drafts without having any low finishes. But, oh well, we know that the Gold Coast Suns have been doing that for a little bit longer. Cooper Duff-Tytler was West Coast choice with their 2nd selection. Again, not really a surprise. I think everyone, including myself, had sort of thought it would go this way. And then, when Cal Toomey puts it in his late mail mock, I did notice he changed the wording of it. He said West Coast was set to take Cooper Duff-Tytler, which prior to that, he was using less strong language. But anyway, happy with that as an Eagles fan in terms of the talent, absolutely. Dylan Patterson was then at pick 5, Dan Annable at 6, so Richmond going with the double bid before taking Sam Cumming. So I wasn't sure if the Sam Cumming rumour with Richmond, who went down to Mildura to interview him right before the draft, I didn't know if that was Richmond playing games, because they are pretty good at the old smoke screen. We know that from last year. I think they did the same thing with Bowen. Now, of course, they took Sam Cumming, but their surprise pick was with the 2nd selection, and I think Cal Toomey had Sullivan Roby to him. So they pounced on Sam Grill. And I suppose, while I probably would have gone Sullivan Roby ahead, the argument for going to Sam Grill was probably that he's quite distinctly different from a Sam Cumming, and certainly different to what they've got with his speed and line-breaking ability. And it's not to say that Sullivan Roby really lacks it in terms of X factor or anything, but I suppose Sam Cumming is also a versatile midfielder who plays forward. Sullivan Roby and Sam Law all in the same team. Maybe they felt like that was too much with Smiley there as well. I'm not sure. They probably just rated Sam Grill higher. So that was the first deviation from expectation. And Essendon would have been all too happy to take Sullivan Roby at 9 before Jacob Farrow became the first West Australian drafted at pick 10. I was a little surprised, even though we'd heard the rumour. Even upon reflection, I was surprised to see Jacob Farrow selected before Xavier Taylor. I would have thought that was the play. But I suppose, Farrow probably as a smooth-moving midfielder could become quite a high-level player. And I guess it just remains to be seen whether he becomes that. So then Melbourne are on the board and they took Xavier Taylor and Latrell Pickett. This was the first big surprise. I think we had heard the connection. Obviously, there's the Cozzy Pickett connection, his cousin. We heard that Melbourne liked Latrell Pickett. But I think Cal Toomey himself said he didn't really see him being taken with either of these first 2 picks. I thought Essendon played this quite well. Assuming they had interest in Dyson Sharp, I think they played this scenario quite cleverly in the sense that I don't think they thought Melbourne would take a Dyson Sharp, and evidently they were right, and I wouldn't have thought Melbourne would be the team that takes Dyson Sharp. So, they go the Farrow and they go the Sullivan Roby, knowing that those guys probably don't get past Melbourne, and then they come back into the draft at 13. So, just on Melbourne, I think that's it's a very bold pick. But we know Cozzy Pickett himself was also a massive bolter in his draft year, and that ended up being a bargain. I think he was pick 12 from memory, as was Latrell Pickett, so that bodes well for them. And a brave call from Melbourne, but I have liked their drafting, so I will not offer too much doubt in that space. And I think Essendon's mix here of Roby, Farrow, and Sharp would have probably pleased Eagles fans. I go back to that because I'm an Eagles fan naturally, but if it 1, 2, and 13, if we had that mix, I think West Coast fans would be happy. So I think Essendon's played this really well. We thought that they might go for Doveston. Dyson Sharp evidently too good to pass up here. So then GWS, from memory, traded up to this pick with Hawthorn. They bid on Harry Kyle, who matched to go to the Sydney Swans. And then they took Oscar Taylor, who was the player that I kept linking to myself. I didn't make that up or anything, or that connection. I think Toomey made it first, but I've always liked that link as that sort of player that's being suitable to their game style. And it makes perfect sense. So then North Melbourne, via the live trade-in with Carlton, move up to this spot. And I think Toomey had here North here taking Latrell Pickett. But in this scenario, he's not available. I think they'll be absolutely wrapped. Not only to have Lockie Doveston here at 16, filling that void of that clever small forward that I think North Melbourne could really use. But as it currently stands, another player that I've linked to them heavily myself, only because I think it makes sense, is Blake Threadgold. And they have the first selection on night 2. So I think North will be very happy that they have taken a first rounder in Lockie Doveston, or Doveston. That is throwing me. Anyway. And they still hold a first rounder next year. I think they don't have a second rounder of their own next year, but they've sort of made up a little bit of ground, obviously having traded their first this year. So then we get to a very weird part of the draft here, where West Coast again traded up to Hawthorn's pick that was right ahead. And I think this might have been, if I'm honest, a serious botching by West Coast in terms of the way it's played out, because they gave up a future second to move up one spot to get Hawthorn's pick, and nothing, as far as I can tell, has come back. I think it's just a future second, which might be tied to St Kilda. So essentially the compensation for Liam Ryan, right? So West Coast move up the order and then immediately drop a double bid on Jai Murray and Bo Adensall. And props to Toomey, he called this correctly. There were other things he got wrong, but his mail here on West Coast, I actually have to give him credit. I thought it was a bit of a shot in the dark, and I was wrong. So Jai Murray got matched. So I think West Coast possibly thought that if they traded up one spot, that would create the squeeze on the Gold Coast Suns to not be able to match a bid on Bo Adensall. But they've evidently miscalculated that, and maybe they were just desperate for Adensall. But if they were, I have to think that why would you not also bid at Dill Patterson at the start of the draft? So they've put themselves in this situation where Gold Coast have a line ball decision to make to try and match a bid at a Bo Adensall bid. And they do. So West Coast presumably missed out on the player that they actually wanted here. And I still think Josh Lindsay, who they actually took at 19, is a rock-solid selection, not for the positional need, but for the talent. I do think this draft is starting to see a bit of a drop-off as we get into this part. And I think Josh Lindsay is a talented enough player to absolutely justify at 19. But I don't think this played out the way West Coast wanted to. And to give up the entire compensation for Liam Ryan to move up one spot to get ahead of Hawthorn to take Lindsay, I don't think that's what they were thinking. Anyway, that for me is a head scratcher, and I don't know if I've seen a club completely misfire on a live trade like that. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is exactly how they wanted to go. Maybe they had intel that Hawthorn would take Lindsay. I'm not sure. I actually thought West Coast might go Cam Nairn, who then joined Hawthorn at pick 20. I think they'll be happy with that. Nairn was invited to the first night of the draft. We saw him there on camera, and a player with some upside. So he's a 188 centimetre medium forward at the moment, but I think with his running capacity could be a hard-running wingman who is versatile as well. So again, it's Hawthorn, so you kind of trust they're likely to get the best out of him. Then we had another interesting move here, one of two bids that were not matched. So the Bulldogs repeating history, where they bid on Josh Dunkley a number of years ago and ended up with him from Sydney, who didn't match. This time, it's an academy player called Lachlan Carmichael, the running defender, who was probably a bit of a surprise to go ahead of Max King, or at least I kind of thought that. I thought the bid might be for Max King at the time. But Sydney opted not to match. Perhaps this was quite early for Carmichael compared to, the media consensus rankings. And Sydney decided not to match the bid. It would have probably put them in a deficit, I presume. And the Bulldogs end up with the running defender. So a nice move from them. Adelaide took Mitch Marsh. This one was probably in the stars. I thought that, it could have been a choice between Marsh and Schubert. Schubert being more of a genuine key position player, and Marsh obviously a little bit of a tweener size, but has some really good ball skills in general. So a great level talent there, and a bit of narrative as well with his father playing for the club. I think they'll be very happy with that, and a bit of a bargain at 22. So then Hawthorn get their key forward in Schubert to pair with Nairn. So a couple of forwards here for the Hawthorn Football Club. I don't think they had any desperate glaring list needs, and I think at this part of the draft, probably an absence of midfielders where it's not a bit of a reach. I know that Ollie Greaves is probably expected to go somewhat soon, but I think Schubert was probably the more highly rated talent, that's for sure. And again, they don't have the need for it, but they're probably in a position to take the punt on a key position player. Geelong also, this is a great selection for them at 24. Didn't really know what they would do. To end up with Harley Barker, who admittedly is coming off an ACL, is a very high upside talent. And with Geelong in the shape that they are in as a footy club, they are the perfect club, among a few others, to take the punt on a kid recovering from an ACL because the upside is there. And you just get the feeling, again, with their system and their ability to get the most out of their talented players, I think Harley Barker will probably be a very good player at Geelong, to be honest with you. And then again, another surprise, the second bid that was not matched on the night. I suppose it was a bit of inevitable when, there's so many academy players and club-tied players that this would happen, where players would slip through. I didn't really expect it to be swayed to Fremantle. I certainly didn't. A small forward, which was on their list of needs. I think I read that this would put them a couple hundred points in deficit if Essendon had a matched a bid here. So while I would say that maybe Fremantle had planned to bid on Swade and then maybe bid on Tyler Williams, that was the rumour. I'm sure they probably would have done the math and assumed that Essendon would have faced a real squeeze to actually match a bid here. So I want to assume Fremantle actually did want Adam Swade and at least realistically planned for him to end up there. So a positional need at about the right price. Not the player I thought Fremantle would end up with. But there you go, that closes out the draft. So we still have some talented players on the board. The couple that come to mind are Jevon Philippou still there. I think Toomey or someone suggested he might actually be a pick in the 30s at this point. So it'll be interesting to see if St Kilda do make a play to get into this draft, because that was the rumour. That being said, they don't have a future second, and the future first might be a little pricey at this point. So I'm curious to see if that plays out at all. Noah Hibbins-Hargreaves is still there. I think his talent probably exceeds this part of the draft. Again, I'm not sure exactly which club would look at him. We did expect a Tyler Williams bid tonight, and it didn't happen. So it'd be curious to see what happens with West Coast pick 29 there. Do they trade back if a bid still hasn't happened because they've only got 2 list spots? It remains to be seen. Ollie Greaves, still another player that's there. Archie Ludowick, Louis Emmett, Riley Onley. There's still some good players on the board, so I'm fascinated to see how this plays out tomorrow, where I said we would be live on the True Footy YouTube channel right here on Footy from the Flat. And for Eagles fans, I will be doing an Eagles reaction first thing in the morning. I've got a bit of a headache at the moment. It's been a very long day, but it will be out tomorrow. So I look forward to hearing from you guys in the comment section. What did you make of night one? Were you happy with their club's picks? Who would be the happiest tonight? I mean, it's hard to go past clubs like Essendon and West Coast, to be honest, even though, I'd probably take points away for West Coast trading that future second. But in terms of the players that were actually picked up, I think those clubs ended up with good ones, as did Richmond, as did Melbourne. And there's not too many howlers, to be honest. So, again, we have to keep an open mind. I will say there is some irony again, or if you want to call it irony, but Gold Coast ending up with 4 picks in the first 18, all first rounders, all on 3-year contracts, interestingly as well. For the second time in 3 years, 4 first rounders in a year where they won a final and traded in Christian Petrarca. I know that it's just tiresome to go on about it, but it's crazy when you look at that, and 2 of those picks were in the top 5. But a little bit depressing for us Eagles fans and whoever else is struggling at the moment at the bottom of the ladder. But I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.